Emma Parker had never believed life would be easy, but she also never expected it to be this heavy. At 28, she had already tasted more struggle than most people twice her age. She lived in a small rented room in the older part of the city, barely big enough for a single bed, a small wardrobe, and a rusted metal table that doubled as a place to eat, study, and store things. The wallpaper peeled from the damp walls, the fan rattled when it spun, and every morning she woke up praying the water heater wouldn't break again. But for Emma, this room was not a sign of failure. It was a reminder of how far she had come. She had grown up in foster care, moving from one home to another, never really belonging anywhere or to anyone. She learned early that if she wanted something, she would have to fight for it herself. And she did. Every single day. Emma worked as a cashier at a small local grocery store. The salary was low, barely enough to cover rent, transportation, and a few groceries for herself. But she never complained. She showed up every morning on time, no matter how exhausted she was, and greeted every customer with a tired but warm smile. Her co-workers often wondered how someone who carried so much weight could still be so gentle. The store closed late, and by the time she walked back home, her feet were swollen and her body ached. That evening was no different. She pushed open the creaky door of her single-room space, turned on the flickering light, and let out a long, tired breath. She placed her worn-out bag on the table, slipped off her uncomfortable shoes, and sat on the edge of her bed. Her hands were rough, her nails short, and she stared at the faint red lines left from 8 hours of handling heavy shopping baskets. Some girls her age had jewelry, makeup collections, and evening plans. Emma had aching fingers and bills to worry about. She didn't envy them. She just wondered what it might feel like to live a life that wasn't constantly drowning in survival. As she leaned back, her old phone vibrated on the table. She reached for it lazily, expecting a notification about bills or some discount advertisement. But when she unlocked the screen, she froze for a moment. Reminder, blind date, Saturday, 6 p.m. Her heart skipped. She had almost forgotten. She stared at the words, emotions twisting inside her. It had been years since she had been on a date. Years of building walls, of convincing herself she didn't have the time for feelings or the luxury to be loved. A blind date. Someone she had never met. Someone she was expected to impress. Her throat tightened. How could I? She whispered to herself. What would they even see in me? She looked around her tiny room, the cracked mirror, the piled-up laundry, the single window covered by an old curtain. And for a moment, she felt unbearably small. Was she even worthy of love? Somewhere deep inside, she wanted to believe she was. She wanted someone to look at her and see more than what life had turned her into. But years of rejection, poverty, disappointment, and loneliness had slowly convinced her otherwise. She placed the phone down gently and closed her eyes, exhaustion and fear weighing down on her chest. Tomorrow could be the beginning of something new. Or another reminder that she didn't belong in a world meant for people who had more beauty, more confidence, more money, more everything. As the shaky ceiling fan groaned overhead, Emma lay down, unsure whether she should hope or protect herself from yet another heartbreak. For now, she just closed her tired eyes and let sleep carry her away. Morning sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, waking Emma earlier than usual. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality of the evening sink in. The blind date. Her heart fluttered with a mix of fear and hope. emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Dragging herself from the bed, she walked to the small wooden wardrobe in the corner of the room. The door creaked as she opened it, revealing a collection of simple, worn-out clothes. Plain shirts, faded jeans, a couple of sweaters that had survived more winters than she wanted to admit. She scanned each piece slowly, her chest tightening with embarrassment. None of these were date clothes. No lovely dress, no shoes with a little elegance, nothing that would make someone look at her twice. Everything she owned told the same story. Long hours of work, cheap washing detergent, and no space in life for luxury. She ran her fingers across a faded blue blouse. The stitching was frayed, a button missing. She had once thought of repairing it, but bills and overtime shifts had gotten in the way. The second shirt had a tiny bleach stain near the collar. The third was dotted with tiny pulls from years of wear. Emma stood there, staring helplessly, feeling that familiar heaviness curling around her heart. How can I show up like this? How will he see anything good in me if this is all I have? The thoughts echoed loudly in her mind. And with them came the memories she worked so hard to forget. Sitting outside school because she didn't have a proper uniform. Borrowing clothes from charities. Hearing whispers from other children. She looks poor. No parents. She's different. She had spent years telling herself she was strong enough not to care. But at that moment, standing in front of the wardrobe, she felt like that little girl again, the one who never fit in, the one who never belonged anywhere. Her eyes stung. She shut the wardrobe door and sat on the bed, burying her face in her hands. Maybe I should just cancel, she whispered shakily. It's better than being judged again. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the spiral. A message from Sophie, her co-worker. Big day today. Don't overthink it. Emma stared at the screen before typing back slowly, I'm not sure I should go. Seconds later, Sophie sent a voice note. Emma pressed play. Sophie's bright, confident voice filled the quiet room. Emma, if someone wants to know you, clothes won't matter. Not everyone is looking for perfection. Some people just want someone real, and that's you. Emma exhaled, her eyes softening. Sophie always knew the right words. She had seen Emma stay late at the store, covering shifts to help a co-worker. She had seen Emma share her lunch with someone who forgot theirs. She knew the person behind the worn clothes. But knowing something isn't the same as believing it. Emma stood and walked back to the wardrobe, opening it again. This time, she looked not at the clothes, but at herself reflected in the mirror on the inside of the door. Her hair was simple, her face tired, her clothes ordinary. But her eyes, they still held kindness. She lifted her chin slightly. Was that enough? Could someone see her worth before seeing her disadvantage? She didn't know. But she also knew that canceling meant surrendering to the same fears that had held her back for years. And somewhere inside, she didn't want to give fear that victory again. She inhaled deeply and whispered to herself, almost like a promise. I'll try, even if I'm afraid. I'll try. Emma didn't feel confident yet, but she had taken the first step. The day would unfold, and her heart would decide the rest. The rest of the day passed slowly, each hour filled with growing nerves. By late afternoon, Emma knew she had to make a choice. Either let fear speak for her again, or take the small leap of courage she had promised herself that morning. She stood in front of the wardrobe once more and pulled out the blouse that looked the least worn. A soft, cream-colored top she usually saved for special occasions. It wasn't new, but it was clean, and it still held a faint hint of lavender from the last wash. She paired it with her darkest pair of jeans, hoping they still looked presentable. The iron sputtered and hissed, barely holding heat, but she managed to press out the wrinkles. Each stroke of the iron felt symbolic, like smoothing out the creases in her life just long enough for one evening. Her makeup routine was simple. She applied a small amount of foundation, lightly brushed her cheeks, and added a soft touch of lip color. She didn't own expensive cosmetics, but her reflection now looked fresher, gentler, and maybe just a little hopeful. She brushed her hair into a tidy low ponytail, staring at herself in the mirror. She wasn't dressed to impress, but she was dressed as the best version of herself she could muster. She slipped on her plain black flats, picked up her old handbag, and stepped out of the room. Locking the door behind her, she took a deep breath and walked down the narrow staircase of the small apartment building. Evening air brushed her face, cool and slightly scented with city dust and street food. Emma could have booked a taxi, but even thinking of the fare made her stomach tighten. So she walked to the bus stop and boarded the crowded city bus. She stood holding the railing as the bus rattled forward, her mind racing faster than the traffic outside. What if he judges me as soon as he sees me? What if he thinks I don't belong there? What if I embarrass myself? The doubts circled her like whispers from the past, but she kept moving forward anyway. Every mile the bus rolled brought her one step closer to something she had avoided for so long. Hope. When the bus stopped near the downtown restaurant, she stepped off and looked up. It was a warm, elegant building, far nicer than anywhere she normally went. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. With one final breath, Emma walked toward the door. Her palms were sweating, her stomach was tight, but her steps were steady. She was nervous, she was afraid, but she was here, and that alone was something brave. Emma stepped through the restaurant doors and instantly felt the shift in atmosphere. Warm lights hung from the ceiling, soft music flowed through the air, and each table was decorated with white linen and polished silverware. It was the kind of place where people came dressed in elegance, not in faded jeans and the only decent blouse they owned. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching her bag strap. A few heads turned. Some people glanced at her for only a second before returning to their meals. Others looked her up and down with a curiosity that stung. Their outfits sparkled, jewelry glinting under the golden lights. Everyone seemed to belong. Everyone except her. Emma swallowed and forced her feet forward. A waiter rushed past her without a greeting, heading quickly to another table. Another walked right in front of her, glanced at her clothes, and, thinking she must be lost, gestured toward the exit instead of the tables. I have a reservation," Emma managed to say. The waiter blinked, as though surprised she wasn't there to ask for directions. "Oh, name," he said. His tone clipped. Emma Parker." He scanned the list without looking at her, then simply pointed toward a small table near the window, away from the center of the room. "Over there. He'll be here shortly." "No, please, follow me." No welcoming smile. Just a cold gesture, as though she were an inconvenience. Emma made her way to the table, shoulders shrinking inwards. She sat down carefully, wishing she could disappear into the chair. She smoothed her hands on her lap, noticing again the roughness of her skin, the marks of long hours and small paychecks. She stared at the fork and thought, I don't belong here. Maybe coming here was a mistake. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could almost hear it. She started rehearsing excuses. Maybe she could pretend she received an emergency call and quietly leave before her date arrived. Then a voice behind her said gently, Emma? She turned. Michael Turner stood there, tall, well-dressed, holding a calm and warm smile. He looked genuinely pleased to see her. His dark jacket fit neatly, and his hair was slightly wind-tousled, as though he had rushed to be on time. Emma stood up awkwardly, suddenly more aware of her plain clothes, her simple shoes, everything she didn't have. Hi, she said softly. They sat. Michael looked at her kindly. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it again before blurting out, I'm sorry. I know I don't look dressed for a place like this. I tried. Her voice trembled, humiliation crawling up her throat. Most men would have tried to quickly reassure her with polite words or pretend not to notice. But Michael didn't look away. Not from her clothes, not from her discomfort, and certainly not from her fear. Instead, he leaned slightly forward and said softly, Emma, I came here to meet you, not your clothes. Emma blinked, unable to speak. Michael continued, his voice gentle but sincere. A nice outfit never tells you who someone is. But your eyes, your hands, your voice, those tell a story. She looked at him, her throat tightening. He nodded toward her hands resting on the table, small, tired, rough. These hands work hard. And that means something. Trust me, I understand struggle. He paused before adding quietly, I'm a single father. Emma's eyes widened. Something shifted. She hadn't expected that. Michael smiled, slightly sheepish. It's not easy. I cook, clean, earn, pack lunches, forget to iron school uniforms. Some days, I feel like I'm barely keeping up. So believe me, I know what it's like when life doesn't leave room for perfect appearances. Emma exhaled slowly. The tension across her chest loosened. Not all at once, but enough to breathe again. For the first time, she looked into his eyes fully. They were sincere, patient, human. The waiter finally approached, and though he still seemed dismissive, Michael's tone changed. Thank you. We're ready to order, he said firmly but politely, reminding the waiter without words that Emma deserved the same respect as any other guest. When the waiter left, Michael asked gently, Tell me about you. What's your story? Emma hesitated, afraid of saying too much, afraid of sounding small. But he waited with a quiet intensity that made it impossible to stay closed. So she began. She told him about growing up without a stable home, about always working, about how she hadn't been on a date in years because surviving didn't leave time for dreaming. Michael listened, not with pity, but with admiration. You're stronger than you think, he said softly when she finished. Her lips parted speechless. No one had ever said that to her before. Michael then shared a small piece of his own story, losing his partner young, raising a daughter alone, juggling jobs and parenting and exhaustion. He didn't speak like he wanted sympathy. He spoke like someone who had accepted life's pain and still chosen kindness. And slowly, Emma relaxed. Her posture straightened, her voice steadied. She met his eyes without looking away. Their conversation deepened, not about money or status, but about effort, struggle, and what it means to keep going even when the world doesn't make it easy. For the first time that night, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Seen, heard, valued. And that was more beautiful than any dress she could have worn. Just as Emma began to feel completely at ease with Michael, a soft, cheerful voice broke into the conversation. "Daddy, who's this?" Emma turned to see a little girl of about 6, with bright brown eyes and a wide smile. Michael's daughter, Lily, had arrived after her dance class, clutching her small backpack and looking curious. Emma froze for a moment, unsure of how to greet a child she had just met. But Lily didn't hesitate. She ran forward and held out her tiny hand. "You look pretty," she exclaimed, her eyes twinkling. Emma's chest warmed, and a soft laugh escaped her lips. No one had ever called her pretty in a long time, not in the way that felt genuine, that came from the heart. Her cheeks flushed as Lily tugged gently at her hand, insisting she come sit closer. Michael smiled, watching the interaction. "She's honest," he said quietly, "and she knows kindness when she sees it." The rest of the evening passed in a gentle rhythm. They laughed together, shared stories, and talked about small joys in life. Michael spoke about Lily's mischievous antics and the lessons he had learned as a single parent. Emma shared little moments from her life, her work, her dreams, her struggles, and felt no judgment, only understanding. It wasn't a lavish date. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic romantic tension. Just simple conversation, connection, and moments of genuine human warmth. By the end of the night, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. She didn't walk away with a new boyfriend, but she carried something far more valuable: confidence in herself, self-respect that had been buried under years of struggle, hope for the possibility of better days. When she stepped out into the cool night air, she took a deep breath, letting it fill her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt worthy. Not because of what she wore or what she had, but because someone had chosen to see her as she truly was. As she walked back to her small apartment, the city lights reflected in her eyes, she thought, "Sometimes it takes just one kind person to rewrite the story we believe about ourselves." And for Emma Parker, that night would always be remembered, not for where she went or what she wore, but for how one simple act of understanding and kindness had the power to change a life. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. And that hope felt like home.